Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I, Councilmember Hunt, call the May 2nd, 2023 City Council Planning, Development, and Environment Committee meeting to order. I am joined with Council President Walsh and Council Deputy President Hall this evening. There are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There's a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments after the presentation and committee question and answer periods on tonight's agenda items. And the first item on our agenda this evening is public comment. So members of the public may address council at this time in person or virtually, and those who are signed up in advance to make comments will be called on first. If you are joining us virtually and would like to make comments, I will first check in if there are any virtual attendees.
Chair Hunt, we have no virtual attendees at this time.
Okay. Well, as a reminder, written comments can be submitted at any time to citycouncil@issaquah.gov, and we do also have a public comment opportunity after our one agenda item for today, which is ID 1411, adoption of 2021 building and fire codes. So I will call for that public comment opportunity later in the meeting. So with that, I will move past public comment, as there are also no members of the public in the room. And we will go to the first item, which is approval of the minutes. We have minutes of the March 28th meeting. I did not have any edits or comments on those, so I move to approve the minutes of the March 28th meeting as they appear in our packet. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Great. And then we have our first and only item, which is ID 1411, adoption of 2021 building and fire codes. And this will be presented by James Gray, building official. Welcome.
Turn on your microphone, James.
Yes, there's a button, and then it will, yeah.
All right, apologies. Thank you through the chair. Just a moment for some help. Okay, thank you again. Super exciting building code stuff. I know everybody loves it as much as I do. This year marks my 30th year in this line of business, so this is probably more exciting for me than it is for most. So what we're here to talk about tonight, first of all, my name is James Gray. I'm the building official for the city of Issaquah, and we're here this evening to present the 2021 suite of building codes and energy codes. And when we say building code package, that includes mechanical, electrical, the energy, which is a standalone ordinance with the state, and also the fire codes. So adoption of these codes, which includes 2 new sections this time. This is a little different than the last time we adopted the building code package. We have the Contractor's Code of Conduct, which the council has already reviewed and approved. That's incorporated into our Title 16, which is part of our code package. But the big new one this time is the Wildland Urban Interface Code. So in the staff report, I provided a detail of all of these codes. I didn't count. I think there's about 14, maybe 12 or 14. If I had them on the table here, they wouldn't fit on this dais, so the actual physical books. So there's quite a bit to it. But the biggie is the Wildland Urban Interface Code. So what this code does is it provides for hardening of structures for wildland fire events. And we've seen the devastation of wildland events in Colorado, Nevada, California regularly, but we're seeing more of those incursions into Washington, the eastern side for sure. And with global warming and our climate changing, we're just seeing it more and more through the state. So the state has chosen to adopt the Wildland Urban Interface Code as a provision to create some structure hardening, and I can get into a little bit more of what that detail is about. Primarily, in a wildland event, the embers are falling on the structures. Probably some folks have seen the roofs catching fire, and then also underneath decks, the embers blow up underneath the deck and it will ignite the materials underneath the deck. So there's an example of structure hardening is mesh that goes under these decks to keep, of a certain size, to keep those embers from igniting those if the deck is at the right height. Siding on structures is required to be non-combustible. So a lot of your new construction materials are non-combustible, like you might have heard of the hardy plank siding, some of those cementitious boards, but the cedar lap siding is no longer allowed. And this is for new structures. Got a good question from Deputy Council President Hall about what structures these apply to. So this is new structures and some significant remodels and re-roofs. So every 3 years, the codes are nationally reviewed and published. And for those that heard my spiel on this 3 years ago, I apologize, but there's a national consensus process at the International Code Council that involves code professionals like myself on the state and the local level and the federal level, and contractors, architects, industry specialists. There's many different members of the public that are peer groups that are involved in this process. They take public input for years before the codes are published, and then there's in-person meetings, and they finally end up with this actual document that we adopt. And then that document is reviewed by the State Building Code Council, the SBCC, which is empowered by the state, and then we're required to follow suit with their adoption in the RCW that's listed on the page. So our direction that we're asking for from PDE committee today and from council in June is to adopt the codes. And while we have some provisions that are discretionary, the majority of it is mandatory. The pieces that are discretionary, there's a few different things. For example, there are 2 new recycling provisions in the building code, and they have to do with they're kind of a replacement for an ordinance that we already have. So we chose not to adopt those. They go a little bit further, but we're not quite ready for those yet, and the industry is not quite ready for them yet. They have to do with pulling lumber from buildings and pulling the nails out and reusing that lumber, which a lot of some developers already do. But our recycling code requires that all those materials are separated off-site, and they provide a certification to the building inspector before the certificate of occupancy is issued to show that that actually has been done. So a little bit of background. Again, every 3 years we have this work that's done at the federal level and then at the state level in the state of Washington. So we use technical committees that include building officials from across the state and primarily the western side of the state. And we have our professional code consultants also that assist us in this adoption process. These codes are incredibly technical. They're just very specific. It's like taking apart an engine on a 1972 Pinto. It's completely different than a different vehicle, and every one of these codes has those kinds of pieces to it. So about a year ago, this process started with the State Building Code Council, and then the state legislature approved the code adoption in April of 2022, effective July 1st, 2023. So we began working on implementing all of these and bringing them into our local code, which is not maybe as simple as it sounds, because they have to coordinate with many other codes, including Title 18, our wastewater codes. There's interactions in all of those pieces. So hopefully the committee and the council will agree with this adoption process, and we will proceed with adoption on July 1st. So this adoption is made up of it's made up of a lot more than this. We've kind of broken it up into 3 pieces: the construction administrative code, the fire code, and the construction codes. Now, the construction administrative code deals with things like code enforcement, for instance, or fees that we charge, or penalties for work without a permit, or how we deal with things that are not required to be permitted, like fences under 6 feet as an example, or sheds. Those types of things are in the construction administrative code. Fire code deals with what you would expect: sprinkler provisions, fire alarms, fire roads. Strangely enough, it does not deal with the wildland urban interface code. All of that falls on the building side. But, and then the last piece is the construction codes, which means adopting the building code, the mechanical code, the plumbing code, the energy code, the property maintenance code. And they are all in the packet that are provided. Those adopt the specific technical regulations. So I wanted to not bore you with a ton of summary of changes. I've got, I responded to Deputy Council President's email with some specifics, and there's quite a bit in the staff report. But I've got a really detailed list on each individual code about, it's painful, about what all the changes are. So the Washington State Energy Codes probably are our biggest in terms of changes. The Wildland Urban Interface Code, of course, is brand new, but the Energy Code we've had. So some examples of the Energy Code, for instance, the minimum R value in the roof used to be R49, now it's R60. It makes a big difference in heat loss in the roof. R values in the walls have gone up. There's a lot of technical provisions in the Energy Code that have to do with how you measure the amount of air that can leave the building. So the majority of buildings now are required to be modeled. And it means that you can't just go in and say, on a commercial building, I'm going to put R30 in the walls, R49 in the lid, and cover it with plastic, and we're done. It means what you're going to have to do is plug all of these things into a computer model and see how the building breathes. How much energy does it lose? How much air does it pull in? And then all the air that it doesn't pull in, you have to have breathable air, and you have to have building health. So those are done with certain types of fans and outside air requirements. Those are pretty specific Energy Code requirements. Another question that was asked was excellent, was about heat pumps. So heat pumps are a newer, it's kind of not new to us in Issaquah, probably new to the rest of the country, but we have a pretty progressive green code here in Issaquah. Even in the state of Washington, we're pretty progressive, which is something we're very proud of. The heat pumps have been in the code for a while, but they're beginning to add them in the code for water heaters, and that was the question that came up. So many of these units are combination water heater and heating element and air conditioning unit. It's all in one unit now, and you get more credit for that. When you build a structure, you have a certain number of credits you have to have for a medium-sized house or a large house. You pull your credits from these different areas, and if you use these types of heat pumps, you get more credits. So those are a few of the examples, and there's quite a bit more. If you'd like that detail, I can certainly share that with you. I talked about the Contractor's Code of Conduct. We're really happy to get that into Title 16. The City of Bellevue amendments, those are important because they provide our firefighting support. This is not new from last time, but what's new is that we've locked them into our code this time because unfortunately Bellevue's a little behind and they don't have their codes ready for July 1st. But we will revisit that when that comes up. And of course the revisions to the Construction Administrative Code, which are pretty minor. So another good question that came up in the email is what do we have the ability, what do you have the ability to change and to amend? So if you dug into the meat of any individual code, there are certain things you could do, certain things the state won't allow you to do. Like the residential code is kind of hands-off by state regulation. But the building code, as an example, let me give you an example. So we say by local amendment that a footing in Issaquah has to be at least 18 inches deep, and that's because our ground freezes. It's been measured many, many years that it generally doesn't freeze any deeper than 18 inches in non-frost susceptible soils. We don't want the soil frozen underneath the footing, or it'll jack the building up. So here in Issaquah, we amend the code and say you got to go at least 18 inches deep. All right. So As an example, and I don't think the council would do this, you could say, hey, we think the footings need to be 24 inches deep or 36 inches deep. We probably need to have some technical basis to make that kind of recommendation, but those are the types of things the council could do. The state would be, well, that's fine if you want to go 36 inches deep. To go less restrictive than the state, though, is not permitted. And that's where it gets difficult, figuring out what's more or less restrictive, and that's why we have these code experts that do a lot of that stuff. We really feel that the package that we put together with the code consultants and also our peer cities, we have cooperated on this. We don't pull anything out of the blue, like, Greg Schrader's building official in Bellevue called me up, he's like, what the heck were you guys doing there? That doesn't happen because we generally know what each other are. We're working together on all of this through the process through the last 18 months. Again, they would be enforced by default by the state if the council chose not to do it, and that would be difficult because then we wouldn't have our fees and our construction administrative code and a bunch of other pieces of it. So our recommendation to PDE is that we forward the codes for adoption at the June 5th regular council meeting. And again, this is the timing that I've been through. We're at the meeting, PDE meeting tonight, June 5th regular council meeting for adoption. If that is successful, then July 1st would be the effective date, and any projects received after June 30th for permitting would be designed to meet the new code. So once again, there's our direction. We're looking for feedback on the codes and amendments as presented. And with that, I will leave it open for questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Do we have questions? Council President Walsh.
Thank you. So this is a major area for the Issaquah Climate Action Plan. So I want to drill in particular, there were two strategies within the buildings and energy area that asked for code changes. So I'd like your expertise on whether or not the changes that the state and all of us regionally have decided on, or you're presenting, whether they meet those needs. So the first is BE 1.3, which says partner with regional collaborations to strengthen city energy efficiency codes to reflect best practices and meet established targets. So one of our targets is a 25% decrease in energy use on natural gas and electricity in new and existing buildings community-wide by 2030 from the 2017 levels. We also have net zero greenhouse gas emissions, all of that. So I think that's a pretty open idea, but it's saying, are we strengthening our city energy efficiency codes to reflect best practices?
Thank you for the question, Council President. I think the increases in R values alone that are required for installation in the walls gets us a long way that direction. Now, whether it's a 25% decrease, that it'll probably take some time to see the modeling, and I think once we see the models, we'll know exactly what that impact is, or closer to what that impact is. I feel like the changes in the energy code are pretty significant. In fact, we heard rumors that there's a lawsuit pending at the state level from a builders group about the energy code wanting to block it, and you may have heard some of this come up because they feel like it's too restrictive. And so you can take that for what it's worth, but I think it's probably a pretty clear sign that the new energy code is going a long way. It's one of the most progressive in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've got just two others. The second one is BE 2.5, enact code to phase out fossil fuel infrastructure in new construction while considering possible exceptions. So I assume the rules about natural gas reflect that idea.
They do. Again, thank you for the question. So in Seattle, they've written out natural gas completely. They have the ability to do that. They predate the state building code council and the state adoption, so they can write their own code like that. So the energy code on the state level, what they in a nutshell. It's a little more complicated, but they said you can still use gas, but you just don't get credit for it with high-efficiency furnaces, which is a big deal. Because for a medium-sized house, so medium-sized house, if I recall, used to be you'd need 4.5 credits. Now you need something like 8. So they increased the number of credits you need, and of those credits, a big chunk of those credits was for a high-efficiency furnace. Well, if it's gas, you don't get it. So that is, I think it's the foot in the door for probably removal of gas from the state requirement.
Okay. And then the last one is within the materials and consumption, MC 1.3, enforce existing construction and demolition code requirements, update code to expand the number of projects that comply with waste diversion requirements. So you had talked a little bit about the construction. Do you feel like that meets the goal of that?
Absolutely. We have a pretty aggressive demolition recycling program now, and I don't know how other cities handle it exactly. I haven't researched it, but you can't get a certificate of occupancy until you have proven that your waste contractor has separated that waste, and it's not just all going into the landfill. It's a fairly big deal. Now, if council at some point wants to go further and actually require these reuse of these materials that come out of these structures, so it affects a small portion of construction. So a little house down on Front Street that gets demolished and then they put up townhouses as an example, that little house, for the pieces of it that weren't asbestos laden or have some other hazardous material with it, those studs would have to come out of the walls, and somebody through some process would have to pull nails from them and actually reuse those in other projects. It takes a little more coordination with the recycling facilities, and there's a little more piece to that. But that may be something that council would choose to do at some point in the future. At this point, to rewrite our title, 1640 is where our recycling is now. It didn't make a lot of sense to do it on top of all the rest of this.
Great. Thanks, James.
Thank you
Appreciate
for the
it.
question.
Council Deputy President Hall.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for answering my questions ahead of time. I wasn't expecting that before the meeting, so it was good to see that come through. I guess then the only kind of other higher level question that I had was about how we communicate these kinds of changes with the community, especially because some of them are bigger. I'm thinking of the wildland urban interface stuff in particular. We have a lot of intersection with forested lands here in Issaquah. So just because we haven't really done a lot of outreach and engagement in this space before wouldn't necessarily prevent us from being kind of targeted and specific about maybe social media outreach or something like that in the future, right? We could, I mean, do you see benefit in that? Or maybe it's more for on the developer side or something like that?
Sure, Deputy President, thank you for the question and the comment. We could always do more outreach. I think it's an excellent idea. So for the Wildland Urban Interface Code, so we have a web page started, which I know a web page is not the answer to everything, right? But at least it would get us in the right direction, like, hey, we've got this new thing, and if you come to build here, we want to make sure that, you know, the vegetation that's around your structure is of the right type, that it's not going to, you know, in the event of a wildland fire, it's not going to ignite your structure. So we're starting that process, probably a little bit late, but we're getting going on it. And the same thing for the energy piece. We have a process that's available for that. I guess my other comment is it's kind of for this body and the public comment that comes from this body that folks get some of that input. The State Building Code Council has a lot of detail on their website. Yeah, we could always do more outreach. So I think it's a good comment, and I think we'll bring that back to the department and figure out what we can do to get the word out. Other than just a building permit comes in and it's like, surprise, you've got all these new requirements. So really, the code package, I'm making light of it, but the code package, with the exception of the wildland code, is not significantly changed. So the energy provisions are significantly beefed up at the state level, but the rest of the code is primarily coordination of numbering and new standards and new means of construction that didn't exist 3 years ago that we have available now.
Thank you. And then just to clarify, with regard to Bellevue Fire, so there's not an update coming out of Bellevue right now, but you said we'll monitor that and eventually update our code to be aligned with that. Are you expecting that would be when we do the next building and energy and fire code update, or just whenever it's ready?
No, it'd be before that. As soon as they do that, we'll need to come back to the council with that because it's
necessary, right?
It's necessary. The wording we're getting back is that it's not like there's a bunch of new stuff. You know, Bellevue wants us to have room for ladder trucks, for high rises as an example, and they want to have provisions for instance, they have this equipment that used to be called a DAS, which is a radio repeater system. So when firefighters go into some of these buildings, their radios don't work because all the structure blocks it. So there's this equipment that needs to be installed in the building that repeats their radio system out to the systems on the ground. And those have to match the city of Bellevue's. The word we're getting back from Bellevue is that it's not that there's a bunch of changes, it's just that this stuff all just rolled on them so quickly they didn't have time they've got to redo their numbering and their city code changes. And so we just locked in the stuff they did from last time, and Bellevue Fire is basically said, yeah, that's fine, just locked in. It's going to get you most of the way there. So we coded it into our code this time. Last time we said, we hereby adopt Bellevue ordinance number, I think it was 2369 in 2018. So this time we just took the language out of that whole ordinance and just put it right in our fire code.
All right, great. Thank you. And thank you both for the questions. Several of mine were addressed in your questions. So one additional one is you mentioned the recycling, that there could be more stringent rules around the recycling of the demolition materials. Do you know if there are other neighboring cities that have gone above and beyond in different ways like that, that have adopted stricter codes in either that recycling or other, I'm thinking of those environmental improvements areas?
Thank you for the question, Chair Hunt. I have not. I don't think that folks are to that stage yet. And I think that it's not necessarily so much on the cities, but it's on the recycling facilities. Do they have the infrastructure to be able to do it? So I can put out some feelers and shoot an email to council in the next couple of days about that and find out if other folks are adopting those two appendices.
Okay, I would appreciate that. It's always good, I think, to see what neighbors are doing, so I appreciate that. That was, I think my other questions were addressed. I did wonder if you could define the R value. I think it's a measure of energy efficiency, but I thought, since that came up several times.
Sure. So in insulation, we use two terms, U value and R value, and R is the inverse of U. So it has to do with a thermal transmittance through the wall. So if you think about like I know my parents' home had 2x4 walls, and whenever I cut open the wall, there's a little bit of insulation in there, and usually, it was 50 years old, so it was crunched down and gotten wet, and you could feel the cold on the walls. But the new walls we're doing, R21, it's going up higher and higher, so we have 2x6 thickness of walls, and that bad insulation is really filling up that space, so that R value, which is just the transmittance of heat or cold. The other piece that's really important to that, and I can talk about building codes all night long, bore you with it, but there's pieces. It's something called the thermal bridge. So in commercial buildings, like these metal doors, this is a thermal bridge. So when it's really cold outside, you might even see frost on that door. So we're much more concerned about thermal bridges in commercial buildings now, than we were before. We don't, these metal windows need to have thermal breaks and thermal bridges in between them. It's new emerging technology.
Okay, great, thank you. Any more questions? No? Okay. I will note that for public comment, we do not have any members of the public in the room, and I will check in with City Clerk if there are any members of the public online.
Chair Hunt, no virtual attendees.
All right, thank you. And we will move past public comment on this item, and we will go to council discussion. And the question before us is if we want to recommend any changes or if we would like to move this forward to full council for adoption on the proposed schedule. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. Council Deputy President Hall.
Okay, thanks. Well, I guess I see this as a fairly cut and dry issue, largely mandatory, as you've explained to us, some minor but also some major changes coming through. Good idea to think through the climate action plan, so good to see that very largely aligned with the goals that we've expressed as a council with regard to building and energy goals. Would definitely appreciate kind of thinking through where are our opportunities to engage with impacted communities that might be more impacted than others. Some opportunities it just might make more sense to wait until a permit comes in the door, and you'll definitely know that much more than I. So thank you for your answer to that question, for thinking that through. Also, would be interesting at some point, I know we're super busy as a council, as a city for the next couple years, but at some point it would be interesting to explore what those areas of consideration might be for going above and beyond. I think we've adopted this once before since I've come on council, and I don't know how common or uncommon it is to go above and beyond, but it might be worth, if we ever find ourselves in the future with an empty plate, to consider what are those things that we might consider. But other than that, I'm fine with it as presented, and I think it should go to the council on consent.
Council President.
Yeah, and I will echo toward that idea. I think, if we start to hear murmurings that other communities have decided to go above and beyond in different ways, I think we would love to hear about that. I think the Environmental Board would love if there were areas to go above and beyond that we had heard about in other areas, to evaluate that. But beyond that, I think the fact that at the state level already takes into account a lot of the things that we were contemplating at the ICAP level is really heartening. And I think, it will probably get pushback from developers, but I like the approach of looking at points and using that as a way to de-incentivize rather than necessarily outright ban. It gives us an opportunity to potentially bridge. So I appreciate that the state has taken these actions and that we don't have to sit here disappointed and go, oh, another 3 years where buildings can get built that don't have the incentive to make the adjustment. So I'm excited about some of these changes. I think that just going along with the flow at this point makes the most sense, so I would be comfortable with it going to council on consent.
Okay. I agree with my fellow committee members. I think especially interesting to see the wildland interface fire improvements to help prevent against fire at those wildland interface areas. I like the idea of making sure that our community does know about those changes. The community is concerned about fire, and as you mentioned, the climate change is increasing the risk of fire for communities at this interface, and so I think making sure that we all know what we can do to prevent fire would be important, whether you are doing a major remodel and then you have to interact with that code, or whether maybe you just wanted to take it upon yourself to improve your your home. So to harden your home against fire. Appreciate those improvements. Also appreciate the continued greening of the building code. I was on council 3 years ago when we also saw this, and so I appreciate the improvements to those energy efficiency and associated climate related changes. So I think that's great. And as my fellow council member said, if there are cities that are going above and beyond in our region and finding success, with the recycling as the example that was put forward, if they are able to successfully implement that, for example, that would be great to know about so we can consider that information. But I generally very supportive of this, appreciate all of the information and all of your hard work on making all of these changes and presenting it to us this evening. So with that, I think we all agree we will be recommending this to council for adoption on consent on the schedule that was recommended. So, do you have what you need from us?
I think we do. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Any other comments? All right, great. Then I think we're done with that item, and we only had this one item tonight, so the only other thing would be announcements. Do we have any announcements? No announcements. Then we are adjourned at 7:07 p.m. Thank you.